I'm Bill Leibold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Elizabeth Demaray, Assistant Professor of Fine Arts at Rutgers Camden. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Good, I'm glad to have you. You're working on a very interesting and creative project right now. You're working on a project where you're interviewing students about television. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that project and kind of how you came about it and kind of what's going on?
Sure. The project's called TELLMeTV.
Okay.
And it's not just students. It's basically anyone that is willing to tell me the story of any television program that they've ever watched.
All right.
So I just ask anyone who's participating to just simply sit and recount the story of any television program that they ever remember watching. It could be from their childhood, it could be from the day before, it could be the news from the night before, absolutely anything that they remember and would like to tell the story of.
When you talk about TV, why choose TV? What's the television?
Yeah, so, well, you know, it's interesting to me to think about stories.
Okay.
Us humans have transmitted information to each other for generations and generations and generations before we even became literate as a species to transmit information. And it's of interest to me that in America, at least it seems this way to me, that in America, the stories that we share as a culture have a tendency to be the stories from television. So rather than me sitting across a campfire and telling you a story, you and me might both watch the same television program.
Right.
And so that would be the story that we would share. So I'm interested in sort of recontextualizing those stories as someone just sitting and telling me the story of, say, a Charlie's Angels episode.
Now, are you finding that folks have some shared episodes that they watch, some shared stories that they're watching, or is it kind of all over the place?
You know, I have to tell you, there are certain shows that have a tendency to come up more often than not with certain generations. But it's all over the map. I'm always surprised. I'm always surprised by what people want to recount when they come in and sit down to be videotaped.
So do most of them go back and hearken to the story they just saw, or is it really a television episode that may have had an impact on them? What are you finding in that?
You know, it's tough. That's a tough question because it seems to be the episodes from one's childhood seem to be the ones that were meaningful in some way or another. But it easily could be, you know, there was a great one that I had. It was the Philadelphia local news from the night before.
Okay.
And it was a fabulous story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because when I read through your bio and I saw that you were doing this, some of the shows that kind of harken back to me and the research team were things like The Cosby Show. Right. Or things like Dallas, or...
Yes.
Or some of those kind of things that were very generationally iconic.
That's right, yeah.
In terms of the stories that were told and or the progression of the story for the family or the characters over a long period of time.
Yeah, you know, the thing that's... Yeah, so I think we've had The Cosby Show. We had Dallas, someone did a Dallas episode. The thing that's interesting to me is often people come in and sit down and they say, well, I'd like to tell the story of, and they'll say what program it is, but then they won't be able to remember an individual story. It'll all sort of blend together. So it can take a little while for someone to actually come up with a story of something that they've seen. But yeah, it can be somewhat generational in nature.
Wow. You've also started to, your training is in ceramics.
Yes.
And sculpting.
Yes.
And so I think I'm a little curious, how does one go from sculpting in ceramics into collecting stories?
Right, that's an interesting
through
question.
digital media, because they seem to be so different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good question. So I'm a sculptor.
Okay.
I typically do pieces that often have something to do with our interactions with nature. The nature of consumption, our consumption of nature, those kinds of things. In that vein, I've done pieces like I've knit sweaters for plants.
Oh, wow.
I've manufactured alternative forms of housing for land hermit crabs. You know, little crabs that live on the beaches that borrow shells to live in. Well, there's not enough shells left anymore on the seashores for these animals. So we've designed ones that are better than what we say the nature has designed for the animal to use. And I've also done things like I've installed listening stations for birds in the woods of Pennsylvania that play human music. Because there's a lot of indication that several species of birds listen to human music.
Okay.
But yet nobody has ever studied what they might like, even though they're bombarded with human noise on a regular basis. So a lot of the pieces that I do seem to have to kind of have to do with nature in some way or another. So the TELLMeTV project is sort of like a labor of love. Although I've done video pieces in the past. And I think I was really drawn to this idea of television as stories. I'm interested in the way that, say, an immigrant family can move to America, and if they put their children in front of television, in one generation, their sense of cultural identity may be just washed away. Maybe, well, in place of that, they may have television shows or the desire for the products that are being advertised. So I was really interested in sort of like the power of American culture. And so this just kind of started as a labor of love. I just started sitting people down and just having them tell me the story of any television program because I was interested in recontextualizing this ubiquitous media, this ubiquitous form of media as a spoken story. And then, so the piece are these shorts where people usually tell me the story anywhere from a minute to sometimes 10 or 15 minutes of any television show that they've ever watched. I ask them not to tell me the name of the show or the name of the protagonist so that the viewers have sort of an open-ended experience of the story. And then I represent it on a television set. So when you go to see this in a gallery, you're invited to come and sit on a couch and watch a person's head tell you the story on television.
Oh, wow. It's kind of multi-layered in lots of different ways.
Yeah, there are several layers.
So how do you find those folks? Do you invite them in? Do you travel to collect them?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I mean, you probably know this as being a television host, like who can tell a really good story.
Yeah, I mean, who draws you in?
Yeah, you know, in terms of this piece, it's very democratic. It's anybody that wants to participate.
Okay.
So if I go and I have an exhibition of TELLMeTV, I'll often go to a particular city, and it might be at a university, it might be at a gallery. They'll typically advertise. They'll say, you know, who wants to come and tell this artist the story of any television program you've ever seen? And so then the people that are interested in just sitting and telling a story will come to sort of an open call, and then we'll just collect the stories. And often I'll edit them down to sometimes even short spans that seem to get at something that it is that they're talking about.
Okay.
So there's a number of them on YouTube, and you can see that, you know, one of them might, the title might be Violence, and it's a person telling the story of a cops show from the 1970s that he remembers watching as a child. And the story might be about, you know, the lieutenant and a sidekick, and somebody gets shot, and it seems that the important thing to the person who's telling the story seems to be the relationship between like the two male protagonists, how they deal with violence, how they deal with the aftermath of violence, things like that. So they're often these very sort of simple little shorts that I usually title with some sort of subject. And then they're just sort of shown in serial format. So you can sit and watch, you know, 10 or 15 at a time.
And they're on YouTube, so viewers are watching
So there's I think there's maybe 4 or 5 on YouTube now, and I suspect there'll be more. And what I would really like to do is I'd love to program a television. So if you want to go and watch, you know, a sports channel, it could be people telling the stories of any, you know, any sports event that they've seen on television. Or if somebody wanted to go and watch a medical show, it would be nothing but stories of people talking about medical shows.
Now, we've talked a little bit about the TELLMeTV. What are you working on right now?
Oh, that's great. So I have a tendency to work in, and coming back to sort of your ceramics question, I have a tendency to work in whatever medium or media is dictated by the piece that I'm making.
All right.
And a lot of these pieces used to sort of have to do with our kind of interactions with nature. And lately I've been, I think, a lot more concerned with humans.
Okay.
So right now I'm working on a suite of pieces, most of them are sculptural, that are for people that might be stuck in office buildings.
Oh, okay.
So there's one sculptural piece which is, you know, a desk calendar that sits on your desk. It's 1 page per day.
Right.
I made one that's 86 years long. So it stands 6.5 feet high, and each page is 8.5 by 11. So a person in a cubicle can turn each page and basically watch the course of their life pass by, right, in a very tangible fashion. Another piece are a series of hammocks that allow people to bivouac on the outsides of their office buildings. So when you feel like you just have to get away from it,
right,
you can actually throw a hammock outside your physical building and climb into it.
Ooh, wow.
Another one is a series of these packets where people can grow lichen gardens on the sides of their skyscrapers.
Wow.
Yeah, so these are sort of for people that are stuck in
Now,
office kinds of situations.
Are they on display across the U.S.? Where are you showing next in terms of the conversation?
So TELLMeTV is going to be shown in a small town in upstate New York called Hudson, and it's at a gallery called Incident Report. And the next one opens, I think it's the 1st of December.
All right.
You can actually go to my website and see where things are opening and when.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope our viewers will join you at some of those
yeah.
exhibits and be able to interact with you there.
Wonderful.
So it was great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure.
We'd love to have you back and hear about some of your future projects.
Oh, wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be back in a second. Hello, I'm Bill Eipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Clinton Andrews, professor at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Clint, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
We're glad that you're here. I want to jump right in, and I want you to kind of comment on this. You describe your work on your website as seeking to improve the process and substance of environmental decision-making.
Sure. What does that mean?
Exactly.
All right. Basically, there's a lot of complexity in environmental problems. There's a lot of science. Is this safe or is it dangerous? How much is safe? How much is dangerous? When is it not really a scientific issue, but instead an aesthetic issue? I don't like the way that transmission tower looks as it looms over my house.
Right.
And so we can work on the substance of decision-making, public decision-making especially, about what should be the proper environmental policies, what's an ideal environmental plan. But substance can take you only so far, because at some point we all have to agree on what the substance is. And that's why process is also important. We have to end up having credible results arrived at in a legitimate way.
All right. So what I hear you saying is really about engaging folks in a conversation, engaging folks in some measurable process when we come about that decision, that we, can measure it, can kind of include folks and be able to do that. So really your work is about engaging folks in those kind of ways, correct?
Exactly. However, you don't want to just engage everybody in a free-for-all. You want to try to fashion a constructive conversation and also make sure that it somehow is able to separate wheat from chaff, in the sense that we still want the good science to come out, and we want that to guide us where there is good science. And so we don't want it simply to be a noise machine, but instead to be more deliberative and more thoughtful. And structuring public discourse, public debate, public argument can be tricky. We see the silly season of politics. We've just been through that, and we know that sometimes, in fact, most of the time, we manage to end up in shouting matches instead of that thoughtful discussion.
Thoughtful discussion. Can you help me define the idea of building green? A lot of your work is on environmental building. It seems that over the past decade, there's been a lot of conversation on environmental building or building green. I'm just not really sure, other than it's good for the environment, that I clearly understand the concept outside of that.
That's a great question. Building green is one of those things that stymied the construction industry for decades. And we, in fact, saw competing definitions. My building is green because it has efficient lights in it. Well, my building is green because it has dual flush toilets that are more efficient. Well, my building is green because it has a whole litany of other features, daylighting or energy efficiency or good indoor air quality. And so what we've done over the last decade is try to standardize on a definition that everybody agrees on and that works in the marketplace, so that if you want to buy a green building, you can tell which one is greener than the next. And the way we've done that is by coming up with a set of criteria, sort of almost like a checklist, that says this is greener than that. And what we always include are the site characteristics. Where is this building located? Is it in a nice downtown where you can walk to all your services and amenities? Or is it out in some distant green field where you're going to have to get in your car every time you want a carton of milk? Then you can move on to water and ask, does this building use water efficiently, or does it waste water?
Right.
Does it manage the not just the supply of water, the water you drink that comes out of the tap, but also when it goes down the drain? Are we managing that thoughtfully? Are we managing the storm water from when it rains so that it doesn't cause flooding and runoff into the river? And we can go through a set of factors like that that add up to us being able to say, this is definitely a green building.
It sounds like it's very multi-layered, and the checklist seems very complicated in lots of different ways. So how does one decide what on the checklist is going to be what they're going to engage in? Does the policy allow folks to choose multiple areas, or they have to be efficient in all the areas?
The most important factors, the most important green factors, are going to vary by your location. You know, if you're in Arizona, where you don't have any water but lots of sun, what you're going to want in a green building is super water efficiency and probably solar panels on the roof. If you're in New Jersey, where it rains far too much, at least on some years, and we don't have any energy resources at all, we're at the end of all the pipelines, what you really want is energy efficiency in your building. And because we have pretty lousy air quality, you'd probably want high indoor air quality as one of your criteria.
I'm fascinated by the conversation on the statewide, but also on the federal-wide, the federal agencies. There has been large conversations from the past 4 administrations, spanning several years, about becoming more green. However, what institutional or what other country benchmarks do we look at saying they're the green standard, and that's kind of where we want to progress toward?
You can sort of think of the construction industry that builds the buildings as having leaders and laggards. There are a few innovative architects and engineers and builders out there who are really trying to push the envelope. And what we mostly need to do for them is to get out of the way. And that's actually something that we're pretty good at in the United States, is getting out of the way of business. On the other hand, that's only maybe 1 or 2% of your builders. The other 98% need to be dragged along kicking and screaming. And that's why we turn to government regulation, saying when we build a building, it has to meet a certain level of performance. It has to meet the building code, and we have to put in place appliance efficiency standards and things like that. And the question then becomes, where do we set those standards when we're to drag the laggards along with us? And that varies from country to country, and the Japanese and the Western Europeans are far ahead of the United States in that regard.
Okay. So in terms of looking at the state of New Jersey itself, We looked at the federal level, kind of looked at some of those kind of things and looking towards those areas. State of New Jersey, how are we with dealing with the green element or the environmental element? Jersey gets a lot of bad raps for lots of different things. So the question here is, how green are we and how green can we become?
Okay, that's two questions, but I'll try to answer them both.
Okay.
How green are we? It turns out that we are not very green in terms of our building stock. We have a pretty slow-moving construction industry, and even slower-moving regulatory apparatus, although they're trying. Right now, they're making good efforts. Where we are leaders is in trying to introduce renewable energy into the mix. And so we have one of the best subsidy regimes for getting solar panels on the roof. Wow. And we see companies coming from all over the country to set up business in New Jersey to do that sort of work. And so we're leaders in that part, although we're laggards in terms of energy efficiency and water performance and indoor air quality.
This might lead to my next question. We're in a fairly old area in terms of kind of architecture and settlements. I think in New York City, I think Philadelphia, I think Rutgers 1766. You know, a lot of us have been here for a very long time, meaning population-wise, which means some of the structures are fairly old. How do you convert some of those older structures, or how do you start to migrate places like New York City and Philly and New Jersey into a more energy efficient area?
We have a couple of things going for us as well. For one thing, a lot of these buildings are in nice, tight settlements, which means that I walk to work every morning, for example, because I live near New Brunswick and can walk across the bridge. And a lot of other people in New York and Philly can do that. But then we face this next challenge of how do we make the houses that we live in and the old buildings that we've inherited, how do we make them work a little bit better? And it becomes a system-by-system challenge. So when we can afford to, we swap out the old single-pane windows for double-pane windows. When we can afford it, or when our water heater finally breaks, which they do every 15 years, we take that opportunity to put a newer, more efficient technology in place. Do the same thing with the air conditioning and the heating and the lighting. We're probably not going to change the basic structures of our buildings very much, but we sure can do a lot with the systems within the buildings.
You're in a unique position to talk about some of this stuff because of your background. You come from an engineering perspective, and so there's an engineer, there's a policy person, and there's a planning person. And I'm kind of getting all three of those aspects in terms of the conversation that we're having. How important is it to have engineering in your background in terms of having a conversation about policy with folks?
We went to graduate school, got involved in this program where we tried to create engineers with a difference. And on the theory that the technical strengths that come with an engineering degree could give you better guidance in the world of public policy. And after having lived this for several decades now, my conclusions are that it does help for certain areas of public policy. It's completely useless in lots of other areas. It doesn't help me with healthcare policy or education policy or what's fair. Maybe I can talk about what's efficient, but talking about what's fair is a lot harder. But one thing it does promote is sort of a willingness to say, okay, there's technology and science that are important to our lives and that are important elements of public policy making, and we shouldn't be scared of that. We should be willing to dive in. And in a sense, an engineering degree is sort of like the liberal arts of the sciences. You know, a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of biology, a little bit of math, a little bit of physics, and together you apply it to practical human ends. And that's perfect training for dealing with the worlds of planning and public policy.
Well, let's talk about the practical training. I know you're working on some projects with some students. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about taking that theory of policy, theory of planning, and putting it into real practice in terms of what you're working on right now?
Okay, I have one project that I'm particularly enjoying this year, and let me talk about that. It sort of can stand in for a bunch of other projects. It's called the Solar Decathlon, and we have formed Team New Jersey, which is a group of students at Rutgers and at NJIT together,
Okay.
who are one of the 20 entrants into this international competition to design and then actually build a solar-powered house.
Oh, wow.
And so we have a large group of students on Bush campus, on Cook Douglas, on College Avenue, as well as up at NJIT, that are furiously trying to design this building. None of them have ever designed a building before, so it's quite a challenge for them. There's a bunch of faculty members who are trying to give good advice. Most of them have never built a building either, so you know the advice, you take it with that grain of salt.
Right.
And we're also bringing in people in the industry, nearby engineering consultants and architects who know this stuff cold. And they're working with our students to help them not make the kinds of mistakes that would cause the building to fall down.
Right.
But in any case, we're at a point now where we are 3/4 of the way into the design process. And every week we seem to have a new design, but it's really starting to solidify into something that is kind of interesting and innovative and hopefully attractive. And this is about a 1,000-square-foot house. This is a real house that they're building. And it's going to be completely powered by the sun. So we're going to have solar photovoltaic panels facing south on the roof. And it's going to be super energy efficient.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be made of precast concrete with insulation squirted into the spaces between the concrete panels.
Now, will the students actually get to build this, or is it just the planning process and the design mode?
No, they're going to actually build this.
Oh, wow.
And that's where, if you come back this summer, you're going to see us out there with hard hats on and big insurance bills and everything that goes with actually building a house, and they're going to be doing it.
Good. So at this particular point, what I'm going to do is my producer's in my ear saying time is up, so hopefully this summer we'll be able to come over, see you, some of your students, but I want to thank you for being here today.
I've really enjoyed it.
Good, thanks, I appreciate it. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thank you for watching.